Hello, welcome everyone, and welcome to our summer webinar series conclusion. And we're going to be learning all about routines and transitions tonight. We have some experts here with us we're really excited about. So I'm Diana Rovetti, and I've been running this series, and this is funded by Public and Behavioral Health, State of Nevada. And I'd like to recognize Cassius Adams here in our group, and also Travis Mills, who has been helping me on the series and also works here at the Nevada Center for Excellence in Disabilities.
Hello, everyone. My name is Travis. I do the outreach coordinator. Nice meeting you all.
So we're super excited today to have Dr. Mariela Castro Hostetler and also Christine O'Flaherty from Positive Behavior Supports of Nevada here with us. They're experts on positive behavior supports, and they teach classes to families and professionals. And we're just really honored to have them there speaking to us. Utilize all of our time very wisely tonight. And I want to let you know that there will be a little bit of time at the end for questions. And we would like all of you to fill out our evaluation at the end to help us with our funding and to make our presentations better in the future, because we're always looking for improvements. And with that, I would like to turn the time over to Mariela.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Before we get started, I do like to introduce our project a little bit, just to get an idea. If you haven't heard of Positive Behavior Supports of Nevada, we are completely grant funded, and our funding does come from Healthy Nevada and the Center of Nevada for Excellence of Disabilities. So if you guys are familiar, and I know you guys have been part of a series, the Nevada Center for Excellence of Disabilities is located, I like to call it we're a center within a center. So we are located at the University of Nevada, Reno, but we are within the College of Education and Human Development. And then within that, there is the Center for Excellence of Disabilities. And again, great opportunity to get resources. I'm sure you guys know plenty of that, but if not, you have your experts here, Diana and Travis, to help you with that. But for this project specifically that you're accessing tonight for positive behavior support, this is our family support side. And the really nice thing about this grant funded project is that it is a statewide project, meaning that we offer services across the state. And luckily now we're able to offer a lot of our services remote. We've been offering our classes online, but as we're getting more in tune with how going back to post COVID, we're going to start offering these classes in person. And the really nice thing is that we have trainers out in Elko, Las Vegas, Reno. I am one of the southern region trainers. Christine is up north. And the really nice thing is that we're able to not only provide these trainings, but also provide that extra piece of consultation. Because I know after a specific class, you have all these questions, right? Or trying to go beyond that content. So it's really nice that we're able to offer with our classes a one-to-one consultation with our behavior analysts. And the primary aim for our classes is directed for families who are caring for an individual with disabilities. Of course, our classes are open to the community for all families. So a little bit about this course specifically, and again, routines and transitions, we'll really talk about, what's the difference between schedules and routines? How do we create these daily schedules? Where do I even start about creating a routine? So we'll kind of talk a little bit about that, share a lot of examples with you guys to start getting ideas. I know this is a great time for us to be talking about routines and transitions, especially, again, summer's ending. I know for a lot of us, our kids are going back to school, and that could be a whole new change for not just our kids, but for ourselves too, right? So this is a great opportunity to be involved with this class. And then, of course, we'll talk about transition strategies, right? One of the biggest things is, how do I have my child leave from those preferred fun activities, right? Leaving the park, leaving maybe grandma's house to go do something that probably isn't their favorite thing, or that non-preferred activity. So we'll really target some of those strategies, talk about recommendations that we've used throughout our classes. So something that I want you guys to start thinking about are, some routines and tasks to consider are, what are some routines that are either already working in my home already, or perhaps that I want some strategies to work around. And some of the things that I really like to target throughout this course is talking about bathroom activities, right? Brushing teeth, showering, getting ready for your day, for your child to go to school, using technology. This one has come up a lot recently, again, during the COVID era, of just how to balance that on-screen time, transporting, going in and out of the car, mealtime. What does mealtime look like? Playing a sport, and of course, other things that may come up. And these, again, are routines. And I really want you guys to think about all these different steps that sometimes we do these things so fluently that we don't even think about, right? So when we're having a meal, think about all those different steps that we want to teach our kids that come with depending on what age our kids are, the different steps that are involved within one specific routine, right? That we don't always think about, that we have to perhaps have our child start helping us with prepping a meal, setting the table, right? Having the meal itself, right? And then the after part that comes with it, right? Everyone maybe picks up their dishes, puts them in the sink, one person dries. So there's different things that oftentimes we don't even think about because they're so fluently programmed in what we do. So again, sometimes you'll see as we're going through that this can really be something that we have to either break down, and that eventually it goes into our schedule. And I love that Christine threw out in the chat, right? Does anyone struggle with a specific routine? And I'm pretty sure that I know that things aren't always perfect. So yes, think about them, throw them in the chat, and I'll try to incorporate that within the class as we're moving along. So to begin, I really like to make this decision, what is a schedule? What is a routine? So a schedule is really a list of daily activities that we use to complete. And I really think about using our calendar, right? So many of us have moved into using our iCalendar, Google Calendar to just write out everything that we need to do. Now, when we think about a routine, it's really that step-by-step process, sort of that example that I talked about of how we talk about a meal preparation. And even so, following a recipe, right? There's different things that have to go in order. Order oftentimes matters, but for some routines, order may not necessarily matter, right? And we'll talk about that different distinction. But this is the biggest separation between these two, of what has to go on in one side, and eventually the routine does translate and goes on to live onto that schedule. And throughout this course, I'll actually be talking a lot about visual support. Visual support is fantastic if you have young kids, if you have individuals that visual support is their main form of communication. I really like using this because sometimes for a lot of our kids, right, and throughout this course, I'll be talking about this a lot, of keeping things age appropriate, right? Especially, I like to think about when we create things and we set up things for our 2-year-olds, our 3-year-olds, sometimes words are hard and comprehension can be really difficult, but perhaps having that visual support can really facilitate that. And what I mean by visual support, if a lot of you are familiar with pet cards, so overall visual support can be used as a substitute or something to facilitate our spoken language. And it really helps a lot of individuals with and without disabilities to help remember thoughts, ideas, anything to help them transition. And overall, it creates this permanent product, right? Because I know for my 2-year-old, whenever I tell them, hey, what we're going to do tonight, we're going to go pick up a book and do this. And, we're going to tuck you into bed. And sometimes that thought just goes out the door, right? They don't really retain that information. But a lot of times, if we create some type of visual support, something that they can carry around, essentially a permanent product, maybe it's a picture of them holding a book, right? Or maybe a picture of their favorite book. This can serve as a permanent reminder of what's going to come next. And again, I'll be bringing up visual support as a way of almost a transition tip of something that will help them in new situations, a new environment where it can become overwhelming. As we move into those daily schedules, I like to point out, because a lot of times, right, when we think about our schedules, what do we use as a part of our daily schedules? And I like to talk about, I've mentioned the calendars, our phones that we've programmed into having those reminders, day planners, if you use those. I know a lot of folks still do, to have that permanent thing written out, and something almost that visual support, right? That we can see. But something to keep in mind too is that schedules may change day to day. So as we go and create our schedules, I want you guys to start thinking about, okay, what are some things that happen on a regular basis for yourself, for your child, right? So something easy that I think about that's easy to program is those regular work events, right? So I know that my child goes to school every day from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m., right? Or maybe that they go to daycare. So that is something that doesn't often change. For our adults too, that are going to JDT settings, JDT facilities, that can also be part of their daily routine. We go to work, right? If I know I go to work 8 to 5 every day, that's something that's not going to change. Now, the really nice thing about schedules, and something that we really like to program, is thinking about those things that are unusual, those new or different events, whether they're, whether our kids really like them or maybe they don't. But having that programmed into our schedule is something that really brings up, okay, I know this is coming up at the end of the week, right? It's not a big surprise. So that almost sets them up for success for those big transitions that I'll be talking about towards the end of class. But think about those unusual events that don't happen on a regular weekly basis, right? Perhaps grandma and grandpa are visiting this week. Maybe we have a doctor's appointment, those pesky dentist appointments, right? So they're not a complete shocker when they come up. And then, of course, overall, just those changes to expect that come up with our daily schedule. Within these schedules, too, we can start to program these cues for transitions. So even if you want to put in like a little, I know sometimes for myself, I like to program little breaks between each meeting, right? I don't like to schedule my Zoom meetings back to back. So I almost have a little cue of, okay, this is going to come next, maybe a break. So those are really nice things that you can actually include in your schedules for your. So we've established a little bit of what this daily schedule is. Now let's talk about how do we create one. And I really like to take a pause here too on kind of get you thinking and asking these questions too of how to create one, because sometimes, it can be really difficult to say, I know that, my child follows a daily schedule in the classroom, but to actually think about how I can implement this at home, we have to get a little bit creative and make it fun for our kids. So I always like to say, if you have a small child, maybe starting off small, right? Maybe we focus on just the morning, on creating a daily schedule, right? I don't want to overwhelm my child into having what does morning look like? What is, midday, afternoon, nighttime? But of course, if keeping it age appropriate, if your child is a teenager, or even if they are a younger child and they can start to understand, then definitely help them create a daily schedule that's going to work for them. For my adults as well, like I mentioned, I like to program things that don't change, such as going to work, right? Maybe I have after school, after work activities, things that are really fun. So really just keep that in mind. But ask yourself these questions, right? So who are some key people that are going to be at these different locations? What is the setting going to look like? What are some activities? And start to program and start to see those differences as you start to create these things, right? Maybe on Wednesdays after school, we're going to go to the grocery store. Maybe, after a long day of work, I know I'm going to play a nice fun puzzle or a board game with my kids. Those are fun things to program too, right? So when we're creating this, don't just put all the things that we have to do. I know I like to program little fun things in my own daily schedule too. And again, using consistent language, or language that's going to be understood by your child. Going back to that visual support, right? If your child isn't necessarily at that reading level, maybe we want to just program pictures. And I'll be showing you different examples of what that can look like to implement the visual support. So as we're talking about selecting a daily representation system, or how we're going to create this daily schedule, again, consider the skill level and communication of your child. Again, do we want to include some visual support? If visual support isn't needed, maybe just writing out, right? We're going to go to the park. We're going to go visit your friends this weekend. That can be sufficient. But if not, go ahead and use pictures. And then the system that you create should be as effortless as possible, right? And that kind of goes in line with, is this something aversive? Is this something that my child, has been involved in? Is it something that can be transported to? That question sort of comes up to when we consider the format of how we're going to create our schedule, right? So who's going to be using it? Perhaps it's my 5-year-old, maybe it's my 2-year-old. It depends. How is it going to express time? I know I like to really hone down of, okay, at 2 p.m., this is what we're going to do at 2:30, but maybe my child doesn't know the concept of time. So that's something to really start to consider. Think of its physical characteristics, right? If maybe you're doing something along the lines of having it transported from grandma and my house, is it something that they can take? Is it laminated, something easy, something that can be washed? Where was it going to be located? I like this question because, and this happened to me a lot when we used to do like our daily planners, right? And I think that's why so many of us have shifted over from a physical daily planner to using something that's on our phone, right? Because our phone is everywhere with us. Because I knew I would leave my daily planner behind and there was my schedule. I would leave everything. So be mindful of where it's going to live. Is the daily schedule underneath my child's bed, right? That's not going to be helpful for them to know what's going to come next. So I always recommend, if you're creating this daily schedule, of something that's going to be used in the home, right? Something that's perhaps posted in the hallway, something that everyone can see. Again, this is just an example that we like to use, and building that schedule. And like I said, it's really nice when the child is involved. Think about the pictures, the words, the times that are available on here. And for this example that Christine and I made for a family, this was a child that was able to, it was age appropriate to have all of the whole day listed on here. But again, maybe if you're just introducing something, start small, right? Maybe just starting something in the morning. What does a morning routine look like? I know for a lot of families that can be a routine in itself, and something to talk about within a schedule. So maybe you start there. But for this child, we wanted to lay out the whole day, right? From 7 a.m. up to bedtime. Having pictures of bed. We have some really fun things programmed in there. We have snack time, we have, TV time. And that's something that we'll talk about too, is, we're not just including expectations or things that have to be done, but also these really fun things too, that I'm pretty sure a lot of our kids don't forget when it's snack time, or when, they've earned access to bonus iPad time. Those are things that they like to remember. So just having them on there keeps them on track of coming into contact with different things that live on the schedule. These are some other fun examples that we've looked into as well. And again, when I talked about taking consideration about time, right? If your child can tell time or not. For the example that we have on the left, we have a clock display, but as the clock is moving, programming those with the visual support is having the amount of time that the child gets with each activity, and then helping them transition and seeing the activity come to next. And very similar on to the example to the right, so an after school routine clock. And this is something that you can create with your child depending on their age, and just being really creative with it. But listing out, okay, homework time, playtime, dinner time. And this is something that, it doesn't have to go necessarily exactly to the T of it, but it could just be an idea of what the child's day could. Some other examples that we offer with the visual schedules. So the first one to the left, that again, we talk about this a lot in our class of creating so for the left example is having the child sort of rip out the little pictures with Velcro. Christine and I are big fans of laminating pictures and Velcroing them down. but also just that sense of completion. I like to relate it to that sense of, as adults, right? We love checklists, we love crossing things out. And for kids, there's also this sense of, there can be a sense of accomplishment of taking pictures off and putting them in an all done pile, right? It kind of shows that, okay, this is my whole schedule laid out, and now I can completely take these pictures off and put them in here. And then for the other example, and I love this one too, because it could be, again, for young learners, for individuals who really need that support of seeing the physical item. So not only do we have the visual support, but also something that looks like that, right? So I'm learning that this is a bus, this is what bus reads, and also a little picture of a bus to see what exactly is going to be part of. So that was a lot of information for daily schedules. And I'm going to turn any questions that you may have and kind of open that up for the chat box too. So if you're following along, please feel free to either save them for the end or making sure that they go on there. So as we transition to routines, now there are going to be some small differences and things that sort of align to, okay, when does a routine eventually live on my schedule? So I'll talk a little bit about that, and you'll see the similarities. But when we're talking about routines, and especially how we teach routines, I always say that first we have to really teach a routine well to our little ones before it can live on that daily schedule. So routines sometimes can be less flexible than schedules. They're predictable, they're consistent, familiar, they're comforting. And I always like to think that when we're teaching these routines to our kids, they can really be broken down in a step-by-step process. Again, it's really hard sometimes for adults to think about, getting ready for bed as a routine itself, because we do it every night, and we do these things so fluently. But for our kids, we really want to teach and break up each of these steps. So I like to put this little visual and kind of go through it, sort of that step-by-step process, right, of how we complete an activity. And I don't know how many of these are out there, but soda machines, right? Vending machines. When we want a snack, there's a reason we gravitate towards these vending machines. I'm thirsty. Maybe I really want a quick snack before I get on my flight, right? So there's that motivation that starts at the beginning. Then we see, oh, look, there's conveniently still a soda machine right before I get to my plane, right? I put money in the machine, or I swipe my card. I have to think about the flavor I want. I press a button. Hopefully things don't get stuck and my soda comes out appropriately. Unscrew the lid, remove it, and now I'm no longer thirsty, or I'm no longer hungry, right? But again, it's a step-by-step process, and we do these things so fluently. But for a small child, we have to break it down sometimes of how to, from the moment my child says, I want a drink, I'm thirsty, to get them to eventually get the end product or that end goal. So why do we follow a routine? Again, just to get everything done. And eventually our child becomes fluent with these routines, right? Think about when you first were teaching your child on how to get ready in the morning, how to brush their teeth, what your expectations are for after school. So as we're building routines from our schedules, and I purposely did start off with daily schedules as the first step in the routine, right? Because creating this daily schedule really gets us in line of, okay, so these are all the expectations that I have for my 5-year-old. These are the expectations that I have for my 13-year-old, right? They're going to look a little bit different. So really start to think about what those expectations are and what you want from your children, because then eventually you can start to create those routines. So I like to, provide different examples here, but the activity is getting ready for school, right? Breaking it down to getting out of bed, maybe going to the bathroom, showering. Maybe we skip showers because that can be really difficult for the morning, getting dressed, but all these different steps that go along. Maybe for your adult, for an adult, right, it looks a little bit different, right? Maybe they prefer to groom in the evenings. Maybe they skip breakfast, or maybe they're going to stop by and get some breakfast on the road. So again, take in mind all those routines that go along with the different age appropriateness. And the second example that I have for a routine is really breaking it down with that visual support. Again, if your child needs that visual support, or that is their form of communication, this is going to be really important. And for this example, right, not only do I have the pictures here, but I've also left room for if my child wants to check mark them, or if you want to do some type of Velcro activity, to just physically remove the cards from this position. So as I go through this of how to build a routine, I'm going to go into these steps a little bit more into detail and kind of think about, again, think back to that first slide that I talked about of routines to consider, right? And even Christine had mentioned in the chat, right? So what are some routines that are difficult? How can I really teach those steps? How do I break those steps further for my child? So think about that as I'm going. Right. Again, selecting an activity, depending on age and skills, selecting that task and activity that your child or adult struggles with. Thinking about the after school routine. I like to ask these questions throughout because, again, that really helps me create this routine or consider what I have to teach. Because again, if I haven't taught these skills, maybe that's where, my child is struggling, or I really want to create those expectations and have them follow through. So again, what does my child have to do? Have they been taught about what's expected to them to do? Right. And I know for a lot of us is they have to do their homework immediately. But maybe they get it, maybe we've programmed of getting a snack after the school routine. So again, what do you have to do? Think of all those things that have to be done, right? So for my child is getting a snack, putting their book bag away, and starting on their homework. So that brings me to my second point, right? Where do they do their homework? Do they have a special spot in their room? Do they do it out in the dining table? And these are all things, again, of teaching those expectations for my child to be successful. And then what do you need to complete it? Do they need, my help? Do they need the access to internet? So think about the different levels of support that are needed for them to be successful, because that's ultimately what we want, right? For my child to follow this routine, but also for them to be able to complete this. And perhaps at first I'm offering a lot more support at the beginning, but eventually the goal is, and then this is where I've talked a lot about breaking down the task for a routine. So this is kind of essentially what I just talked about, but in a step-by-step process, right? I grab a snack, get my materials ready, take items to the work area, setting a timer. I really like the incorporation of this step because for a lot of our kids, right, they either don't know how to ask for a break, or sometimes having these breaks programmed is really helpful for completing a task or actually having it done. So we'll talk a little bit about setting timers and how we want to make sure that they're appropriate for our children. And then self-management. I know depending on what age they are, creating a checklist, right? Especially once they get into middle school and high school, is creating what actually has to get done, right? Setting those deadlines and almost checking off of what I need to do, and kind of increasing those independent skills for those kids who have to create more self-managed tasks within their homework schedule. Kind of going in line, I always like to count to make sure that we are thinking about these visual supports for each individual. If you have to put it in if you have to break it down in a step-by-step routine, this is what it would look like, right? How to wash and doing it in order. So this is another example. Christine specifically worked on this example, and this kind of goes back to creating a routine that's going to be helpful for the individual. And this, she just used some Velcro to kind of show, and I'll play the video because it's a lot more helpful that way, but having the child sort of check off once each task was complete. So perfect. So again, not only is the child manipulating, well, not in this example, but the child is able to manipulate, each of the cards, and then you see that sense of being done, completely done with it. So ways to teach. This is something I think we've recently have added to our curricula. And I think it's, we can spend a whole, this is a little bit of a condensed version, just because we can literally spend 40 minutes on talking about of how we teach. So if you are interested in learning more of these strategies, definitely recommend some of our longer classes, just because we like to spend so much time of talking about ways to teach. And the first one is creating opportunities. And when I say creating opportunities, right, is if I gave my child just a box of crayons, they're going to need something else, right? So those are opportunities that they can ask me, right? Hey, can I have paper? Can I have my coloring book? Also, just waiting for my child, right? Waiting for them to ask for these things is a great way to teach. Modeling, whether it's modeling from myself, another adult. If you have other kids in the home, this is such a great tool of having them watch, perhaps the older kids, of seeing how they ask for things, right? How they complete their after school routine, of what's really working for them. Great tool to do teaching. Role play and knowledge checks. We talk about this a lot when we talk about, how do we teach an expectation? And I always go back of when you're teaching, your 2-year-old, your 3-year-old, how they should play when they go to, to preschool, when they're out in the playground. What are some first things we like to tell them, or how do we tell them, right? We play nicely with others. What does that mean to a 2-year-old? And sometimes we really want to break it down, right? Nicely means I keep my hands to myself. What does keeping my hands to myself look like? Can you show me? So these are things that it's almost that knowledge check, right? Of seeing if they really understand those expectations, right? We use nice words. What are some of your favorite nice words, right? Having them repeat that expectation back. So I probably wouldn't, use this with if I had a 15-year-old, because then I don't know if they would like that. But for some, they really need that, right? Okay, what time did I say curfew was tonight? 10 p.m. Can you tell me again, right? Making sure that they're listening to that expectation. So maybe doing some role play, having them repeat that expectation back, just to really make sure that they're understanding what that expectation is. And then the last one is providing prompts, right? I sort of mentioned this in the last couple of slides of sometimes we want to make sure that we're programming. If my child doesn't know how to do a certain part of that routine, I want to make sure that I help them. I offer that support, right? And whether it's those visual supports, or maybe they need physical guidance, right? So that's where that hand over hand comes in. If they need help brushing their really back teeth, I want to go in and kind of guide their hand, do it for them at first, and then lessen up my prompts as we're going through. Maybe they need a hand over hand of putting their shoes away. I start with that, right? And I know when we are teaching our kids how to tie their shoes, there's going to be a lot more guidance, but then eventually my prompts are going to have to start fading, because again, eventually I want them to do the skill independently. So again, there could be really fun ways to teach a routine and really have fun with it. And then this step, I like talking about this as well as generalize across settings, is that we don't just know how to brush our teeth at home, right? When we go on vacation, we're able to brush our teeth. We know what to do for bed. Same with our kids, right? We want to make sure that we're able to teach the routine in one location. So let's go back to that example of washing our hands. We want to make sure that they're able to wash their hands in our kitchen, and even within our own household, right? I know in my home, in the bathrooms, right, turning on the water, it's the classic knobs, but now in my kitchen, I just have to tap, right? But my child knows how to do those things because, again, I taught them the skill in different types of locations. But then when we go out to McDonald's, they know how to wash their hands, right? Because again, I want to make sure that these skills generalize across different locations. So after the routine is learned and your child is independent, try doing it somewhere else, right? When they go and visit grandma and grandpa, when they go visit their friends, right? Can they still do this when they're at school? So think about all these different things that go in line with teaching that routine, that we want to make sure that they're successful in those different locations. And then I do like to add some tips for routines. Again, teaching to ask for help when a step is difficult. This can be a really challenging one. I know sometimes our kids, if they're having a hard time with a particular step, what do? They tend to not do it, right? Almost that avoidance of, okay, I don't know how to do this and I'm just going to not do it. So if you want, something that we want to make sure is to program, right? Offering that support immediately. If you need help, or if you know that your child is struggling with that, almost just focusing on that before you build that into the routine as a whole, right? And then the second tip that I have on here is ending the routine with a reinforcing item. Again, something that we can spend a whole class in talking about of what reinforcement is, but using those, when we talk about reinforcing items, think about those preferable items and activities. So perhaps preferable items can be either a snack, a toy, activities to help with that learning process. I know for, a lot of kids it's extra iPad time or screen time, or maybe going out to the pool, especially during the summertime, or riding their bike outside. So maybe once that routine is done, the after school routine that we've been talking throughout class, is maybe that they get access to going out and riding their bike with their friends, right? So making that part of the routine as well, or that extra check that they can do. And I know, again, we can talk about this a lot, but talking about rewards, and we want to be specific with what this is, right? So as we're using rewards, we want to make sure that we're pairing that with praise. So at first, we want to make sure that great job doing, following all the steps to your after school routine, excellent job, right? We're specific with our praise so our kids know what they're doing a great job at, and pairing that with that reinforcing item, because eventually, right, we want to fade that preferable item, but we're going to continue using praise as reinforcement. Think about, we all strive and work to get that positive reinforcement. Now at first, right, at this point, not every time I take out the garbage, my husband claps for me, right, and says, great job taking out the trash. But now we use praise as a way to continue that, right? I still appreciate reinforcement when I'm told, thank you for doing this, thank you for doing that for me. But again, I like to be specific with my praise so my child knows exactly what they're doing correctly. The end of the routines, as we transition into our transitions portion, I want you to keep in mind, again, as we've been talking about daily schedules, as we're talking about how to create these routines, of how transitions can fall within those daily schedules, right? Because again, these things all come in line, and of how to create these daily schedules and routines. So what do I mean when I talk about a transition? So a transition is, I always like to think about switching from one activity to the next. And it's usually when I switch over from a non-preferred activity, or when I'm switching from a preferred activity to a non-preferred, right? Often when I'm starting a new activity, ending an activity, transitions are really fun and easy when we're going from, we're eating ice cream and then maybe we're going to the park, right? I don't think a lot of you are having that issue. It's more of, okay, the transition from when we're at the park and it's time to leave, right? Those are some classic examples. Or when we're transitioning perhaps from leaving home in the morning to going to pre-K. Those are often the ones that we tend to struggle with. And why are they difficult? Because again, we're switching activities in general. And oftentimes I like to bring up that when things aren't programmed, right? When my child doesn't know necessarily, I want you to think back at those earlier slides when I talked about, right, those dentist appointments. That can be really hard. when I'm switching over from one homework task to the other. So really ending a preferred activity, or of course, when my child wants to keep playing their favorite video game, right? So now that we've established what a transition is, we'll spend some time on strategies as a whole. And I do like to start with some tips. I usually don't like to start this, but I think it can really start to get us thinking about the strategies as a whole and things that I can implement immediately. So creating adjustments that can ease the transition. Something that I like to bring up is familiarity. Can you bring familiar items or activities to this new setting that you're going to? So again, keep in mind if you're going to a doctor's appointment, right? Can you bring something comforting? Can you bring something that your child like a reinforcing item, right? So maybe they really love to color, or can they bring coloring books as they're waiting, right? Because sometimes just sitting in that waiting room can be really having a preview. Can you visit or share pictures of this new situation? Oftentimes what we recommend to a lot of families who are starting pre-K, right, is can they meet their teacher? Maybe can they go have a tour of the school that they're going to, right? So it's not just an immediate, the transition of, okay, it's a new day, you drop off and you just sleep, right? That can be really scary for a little one. So maybe it's something that, we start talking about, perhaps visiting, and then reinforcement, right? Can they bring a special toy to ease the transition? Can they bring, their backpack? That's something that's, again, familiar and kind of revisits all these adjustments. And then something to kind of go with this too is teaching and clarifying what that expectation is. So again, are we clear of what we expect from our kids? Do they know, when we've said 5 more minutes, at 5 minutes, we're leaving, right? Do they know what 5 minutes really means? And kind of going back to when we talked about those tips for teaching, right, of expectations, is to practice, right? Show me what nice hands means. Show me what walking nicely means. So all these things can kind of help ease that transition. Something else too that we like to use is timers. So again, going back to visual supports, in classrooms in the home, I really like to use kind of like that red ticking timer, I like to call it, just so even if my kids don't know necessarily the what time really means, they still have a countdown. And then recently, we've also discovered this app. It's called a countdown timer for kids. So you can download it, and it's really fun because you can kind of program, how long an activity can be. So if you want to put, I know when I tell my kids, okay, we have to wait for 2 minutes, right? And sometimes I lose track of what 2 minutes really means. So this is kind of a great way for us to be consistent, as well as for our kids to sort of have this little timer go down and seeing it. So once the 2 minutes hits, the child gets access to see what this picture is. So again, just different ways to signal when something is ending and the new activity is going to be. The next one is making transitioning a game. Again, this one can be really fun for a lot of young kids. Examples, right? The cleanup song, clean up, everybody clean up. Something to signal that one activity is ending and now we're changing it up, right? That's probably the most common transition game that we like to introduce in preschools. It's something fun. If you have another song too, that can be really nicely done. I've seen it done in gym classrooms or in PE classrooms to kind of get started, right? Warming up before we start the next activity. So again, anytime that you can incorporate some sort of fun song or making it into a game, that could be a great choice as well. Speaking of choices, again, making it, we talk a lot about choices in our classes, but as parents, think about what the functional goal is that we want, right? The goal is that I want my child to leave the park. And something instead of, because sometimes as soon as my kid hears those words, it's a meltdown completely. So what I like to do is offer a choice, right? Do we want to hop to the car like a bunny, or do we want to jump to the car like a frog? Ultimately, it's still getting my child to leave the park. and we're leaving safely, right? So the choice is how they get to leave the park. Similar to going to bed, right? Do you want to pick out your favorite book, or do you want me to sing to you? So these are all things that that still get the bottom line of my child is still going to bed. It's just how they're going to get there. And again, we talk a lot about choices because it gives my child a sense of control. Sometimes even just hearing those words of going to bed, right, is that precursor of my child having a meltdown. But in this case, it's a great way to offer choices. And again, to build that independence for my. The next strategy, you'll hear us talk about this one a lot as well, is a first and then. This one, again, pairs up really nicely with that visual support. But if not, you can just use that language. It's language that they are often familiar in schools, especially if they're using a PBIS implemented school. And what I like about this one is that it's very clear about what those expectations are. So again, it gives that information and the sequence of that event. And the really nice thing is that the reinforcement is clear, right? So first we have that non-preferred item. First, I'm going to wash my hands, then I get to play. Or first I have to take out the garbage, then I get to play on my phone for 5 minutes, right? So it's really clear. And what I always recommend for families when using this is make sure that what comes after, or what that reinforcement item is, make sure we follow with that too, right? Because eventually we want to show our kids that the system works. So first we say, first we have to clean up, and then we get to go to McDonald's. But deep down, you know that maybe McDonald's isn't going to be an option for dinner tonight. Don't offer it. Make sure that it's something that we can follow through, because if we set this expectation, essentially what we're giving our kids, but we're not doing it, we're not following through as parents, then the validity of the system will lose, and it's not going to be something that is going to be efficiently used for my child. So again, if you've heard it again, it establishes that motivation that mom and grandma's rule, right? First, you have to finish your homework, then we can have playtime. But again, if your child doesn't need the visual support, it's something that you can just say, right? Being very clear that it's not if you do your homework, then you get playtime. It's first, we have to do this. It's almost that non-negotiable. This has to happen first. So again, just to do a little quick review, we talked about daily schedules, and most importantly, we talked about how to create them, right? So really think about what goes on in those daily schedules and really break it down of things that happen regularly, things that you want to program within a daily schedule that perhaps don't happen all of the time, right? So be ready for those inconsistent or those new changes that we can program. And most importantly, for those daily schedules, how is that going to be taught to our little ones? And that kind of falls within the routines too, right? But we want to make sure, especially if we're building these things for the home, that it's somewhere that can be visually posted, right? Something that they can see. I didn't mention this earlier on, but something that we like to do with a lot of our families is posting it on the fridge, right? Our kids are in the kitchen room so often. It's something visual that they really can do. And when we're thinking about creating these things, we can either make them, or you know what, you can also order things off of Amazon. It's really easy to incorporate that into your daily lives. And then routine, right? Before we get to program a routine into our daily schedules, we want to think about the step-by-step, breaking it down, teaching it, and eventually how is that routine going to come up to be part of that daily schedule. And then finally, we talked about transitions of, again, just some tips and recommendations that we've used with a lot of our families, but also those strategies, specifically choices and that first and then of how we use that language to make transitions easier, choices, how we make those transitions fun to make sure that our kids are following through. These are just some resources that we like to share, again, specifically for individuals with autism or individuals with disabilities to incorporate those visual supports. And I know someone asked about receiving access to the PowerPoint, so we will be sure to share those so you have those resources. And then, of course, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Again, we really hope that you can take some of these strategies and begin to implement them, some of those general recommendations, as well as those specific ones on how to incorporate these bringing in daily routines and transitions for your child. If you do have if you have any questions or want to learn more about positive behavior support, I've also linked our website on here, as well as sharing our information on Facebook. We're pretty active on Facebook about sharing our upcoming classes that we have put out. But if you are interested in being added to our newsletter, which you'll get immediate access to what those classes are, or if you want to just put your name on there too, is to please contact our coordinator, Jessica Adge, and I've shared her email on there as well. And I know Diana just shared our eval too in our chat. So I appreciate that. And thank you so much.
Okay, so Samantha, is it his visual schedule that's on the app, or is it more like a communication of kind of what he wants?
So it's a tablet. It has like the visual, I can't remember the name of the app. We have like a talker app, and then we also have an app called ChoiceWorks, which is the one that has the visual schedule, and it has some other functions too. We just got it kind of recently, so I haven't played with it too much yet. His speech therapist recommended it. So yeah, it just has like, you can build a daily schedule with a bunch of pictures, and you like swipe it across the screen as you complete things. And when you touch the pictures, it has like built-in stuff. You can also take photos and record yourself to make like custom things. But yeah, he'll get real stuck on just like wanting to press the buttons over and over and over again. So sometimes that kind of creates its own problem. I guess I didn't even think about this. I suppose I could just like turn the volume down so that he can't hear it anymore.
We were talking, and hearing the talker is probably highly reinforcing to hearing those sounds of
Yeah.
So that could be a certain strategy, and then just having it only available to touch once and then maybe remove it.
Yeah, he definitely likes to look at it. Like he'll walk away and then he'll want to look at it again like a minute later, which, I kind of understand. If it's not right in front of your face, then it doesn't exist. So I want to have it like available so that he can look at it, but I don't want him to get stuck on it. And sometimes he'll click out of the app and go back to the talker app and just press those buttons over and over again. I mean, he's 3, so like some of it's just a matter of impulse control, but anything we can do to kind of help that.
Yeah, I would. I actually really like the idea of turning the volume down, and then when you're going to use it, like in the moment and stuff, like have the volume up, but maybe have more control over the volume.
Yeah,
might be a really good idea. And
I kind of do have another question as I've been thinking, sitting here, it kind of occurred to me. So we do have some other like, low tech visual supports that either his past teachers or occupational therapists have kind of made for us, but it's what I've struggled with is like, I don't have the time or wherewithal to make one myself. And like, yeah, I can ask his therapist to do it, but then that's always like, it's another barrier. Is there any like resource where parents can go and kind of like build their own schedule, like, but without having to like physically do everything? I'm not explaining this very well. It's really hard to find a resource that is like one place where I can always go. I feel like I've had to piecemeal it together as we go along.
We have a few things that I could share with Diane that we can send to you, and then Boardmaker. It's actually free, but then they have a version that's really inexpensive for families, and it's a one-stop shop too. So
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, something like that would be super helpful.
So just Google Boardmaker. I think it's called. I'll put it in chat.
Sure, thank you.
No, that was perfect. I was gonna suggest Boardmaker because that one's like almost like a one-stop shop of programs, and you can just search for what you're like, the actual schedule that you're making, and it's something that's ongoing. So it's, like you said, things change, and it's a great way to make those changes on the spot, and it's pretty easy and it's free.
It's been delightful having you all here for our summer webinar series, and I'd like to thank Mariela and Christine. That was a fabulous presentation. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and hope to see all of you again soon.